I
was asleep when he came back, so I didn't ask him how many. That's the Gemara class. As I am religious with this class, it really starts.
Okay.
It's a core group.
Two.
Love it. He's happy, and he's happy with his mom.
Yeah. Sammy too. Very nice. She came back last night.
She liked it?
About 4:30. He went to class.
None of his business. And he's ready to go.
Came back from Michigan last night. Went to class. As long as it's still at a normal level.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good to have you all here. Only good things we should be able to share together. If you're not getting an email from me, that means that I don't have your email address. So if you want to give it to me, that would be great. Also, somebody left a glasses case here last time we met, which was 2 weeks ago. Anybody ringing any bells? Okay, I'll sell it and use it to buy refreshments.
That person is still out looking.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get to work here. Page 840, we are continuing with our Pasuk 12. Remember, this is the purification process for the person who became Tameh through Tumas Mace. That person needed to have the ashes, the mixture of the ashes of the paraduma and the mayim chayim sprinkled on him or her twice during the 7-day period of impurity, once on the 3rd day, once on the 7th day. Following that 7th day sprinkling, the individual would go to the mikvah, and then in the evening after sunset, he or she would become tahor. That was the process. So obviously, a little bit of an interesting process, a little bit of an unusual process. Not the mikvah part. The mikvah part we know from all kinds of ritual impurity, all kinds of tumah, whatever it is, whether it's nida, zava, zav, whatever it is. So we know that the mikvah is an elemental part of the tahara process. But this sprinkling of the water of the mayim chayim with the ashes of the paraduma is what's unusual. 3 and 7. What's 3 and 7? Why day 3? Why day 7? Okay, so there are Kabbalistic reasons for day 3 and day 7. I want to share with you an approach of the Medrash that actually has some very interesting implications for our Parsha this coming week, Parsha Chayesar. So you know in the Parsha, well, let me begin this way. We mentioned, I think, last time that there's a difference between the first 3 days of Shiva and the remaining days of Shiva. The Gemara couches it in the terms of Shlosha lebechi, 3 days for crying, the Shiva lehesped, and 7 days for eulogizing. 3 days for crying, 7 days for eulogizing. So perhaps since Tumas Mace, right, the Tumah that we're talking about is connected to a person who's died, right? We know that that's the only way you can become Tameh Mace is either through contact or proximity to a person who died. In other words, if it's an animal, right? If you touch an animal, you become Tameh, but it's not Tumas Mace like we're talking about now. You don't need to be sprinkled with the ashes of the Para Aduma in order to become Tahor from Tuma contacted or contracted through an animal. So we're talking here about a person, and since we're talking about Tumas Mace from a person, it makes sense to apply it a little bit to Avelus and to understand the connection. 3 days for Bechi, Shiva for Hesped. Perhaps that's also an indication of certain stages of mourning, right? That the first 3 days we mentioned, that first stage is the most intense period. That's why the custom was at one time that only the closest of friends come during that 3-day period. I think we've since discussed that today everybody is the closest of friends. And if you don't come within that 3-day period, you're on the not friend list, maybe. Right? But so perhaps there are stages to this process. The first 3 days are the most intense. Those are certainly days of crying. And then after day 3, from day 3 to day 7 is perhaps a little bit of a less intense period within the overall intensity of Shiva, perhaps a less intense period, and therefore a person is more willing to be comforted. We know that a person can't be comforted when the body is still present before him. That's a Mishnah in Maseches Brachos. The Mishnah there tells us that you can't comfort someone at the time shemeso mutal lefanav. You can't comfort someone at the time when the body is right before a person. It's not real enough to be comforted. There's no closure, if you will. That's why this minhag America of going to a funeral home and meeting with the family first, filing past through that family room and meeting with the family is halachically questionable. Certainly halachically questionable. We do it, but certainly halachically questionable. But perhaps there are even stages in the mourning process, right? The first 3 and then the remaining 4, day 3 and day 7, perhaps marking these transitions. So we can say that just like there are transitions out of Shiva, so too there are transitions out of Tumas Meis. The first transition happens on day 3, the sprinkling of the ashes of the Para Aduma on day 3. The second transition happens at day 7, and therefore sprinkling of the ashes on day 7 as well, followed of course by mikvah. This is an interesting idea. If you jump back in Chumash to this week's Parsha, go back to Parshas Chayesara, which we did about 100 years ago. Page 106. At the end of Pasuk Beis, the Torah tells us, "Vayavo Avraham lispod lisara velivkosa," that Abraham came, lispod lisara, to eulogize Sarah, velivkosa, and to cry for her, to eulogize her and to cry for her. So there's an interesting commentary by a rabbi from the Katzenellenbogen family. I don't know if that name, it's a very famous name. I don't know if that name rings any bells, but Baruch Katzenellenbogen wrote a commentary to Chumash, among other things. And he writes on this Parsha Chayesara, it's a little bit interesting, the language. Vayavod Abraham lispod lisara velivkosa. Right, to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. It would, he said, seem to make more sense to write Vayavo Avraham lispod vilivkos lisara. Right, that Abraham came lispod, to eulogize and to cry for Sarah. Why lispod lisara vilivkosa? Why is the lisara in between these two actions that Abraham is doing, right? He's coming, lispod and livkot. He's eulogizing and he's crying. So why does lisara interrupt between the two of them? He's eulogizing Sarah and he's crying for Sarah. So why not write lispod v'livkos lisara? Why this particular way? So he says something interesting about a eulogy. He says generally a eulogy is delivered when the person who's passed away is before you. And it is as if you are talking to the person who has passed away. Crying, he says, crying happens afterwards, right? Crying happens after the burial, the mace is no longer there. So the eulogy generally takes place in the presence of the mace. So that's why it is lispod lissara. In other words, when he's crying, Sarah is not there. But when he's giving his eulogy, Sarah is there. Lispod, lissara.
eulogizing the person, but when you're crying for them, but you're also crying for yourself.
So,
And that's why there's
right? I mean, you're crying for yourself, there's no question. And it's actually interesting, there's a debate in the Gemara as to what the purpose of a eulogy is. Is the purpose of a eulogy for the nifter, for the person who's passed away, or is the purpose of the eulogy for the chayim, for the people who are still alive, right? Sometimes those purposes actually can overlap, but that's the debate in the, that's the debate in the, are we giving eulogy to extol the virtues of the person who passed away, or are we giving eulogy to have an impact on the mourners, to cause them to cry, to heighten their grief, if you will? That's the question of what a eulogy is all about. But certainly a eulogy is in the presence of the deceased. So therefore it's lispod lissara. Livkos, to cry, she doesn't need to be there for Abraham to cry. So that's why lissara comes in between the two. So this Friday night, ask at the table, does anybody know the reason, unusual, anybody know the reason why lissara comes in between those two? See if anybody is familiar with this commentary. Also, you'll notice that the chaf of livkosa is small. Right? Look at it in the chumash. It's also that same way, obviously, in the Torah. It's called a kaf zeira, it's a small letter kaf. So the question is why? Why is it a small letter kaf? Okay, so we actually have, if you look at Rashi, does Rashi mention it? Let's see. Rashi does not mention it. It's in the English. In the English, look in the commentary. It says the word "belikos" is written with a small kaf to suggest that the full extent of his weeping was kept private. His grief was infinite, but the full measure of his pain was concealed in his heart in the privacy of his home. Sounds like something that Rav Hirsch would write. Others say that livkosa is that he only cried a little bit, because not that he wasn't upset, but that Sarah's life had been basically a full life, and he only cried a little bit. Some say that he only cried a little bit because to cry too much would seem to indicate that he regretted having done the Akedah. In other words, what was the cause for Sarah's death? The cause for Sarah's death was the Akedah, right? Was the binding of Yitzchak. How did she know about it? So the Medrash says the Satan showed her an image of Abraham shechting Yitzchak. Obviously wasn't a correct image, but showed her the image. And parcha nishmasa. What happened? Her soul sort of just flew out. Her soul, the shock, her soul departed. Rabbi Ketzenel Bogan suggests, very interesting, says that when she heard this, she didn't believe the Satan right away. So he brings this caveat, he brings this interpretation that says that she went to the giants who were living at that time, right? She went to the giants and she said to the giants, look and see if you can see anything. Okay? In other words, where was Sarah? Where was Sarah and Abraham? Where were they living? In Kiryat Arba, Hebron, right? They were in Hebron. Marata Machpelah was how far away? How long did it take Abraham to get there? 3 days, right? A 3-day journey, right? Vayash came Abraham Baboker. Abraham got up in the morning and he left early. And Behinei Bayom HaShlishi, on the 3rd day, he saw the place Merachot. It's a 3-day journey, a 3-day walk from Hebron to Yerushalayim. Maybe a little bit easier today with the roads, right? 3-day walk from Hebron to Yerushalayim. So obviously, Sarah got this information. How could she double check? So she asked the giants to look. The giants are, I guess, tall enough they could see, right? So the giants, whatever the giants looked and saw Abraham they saw Abraham with the knife up in the air, and they saw Yitzchak, bound on this altar, this mizbeach, and that's what they told Sarah and Parcha Nishmasa, right? And she, her soul just departed from her. So it could be that Abraham would, by excessively crying, Abraham would in effect be demonstrating he regretted what he had done. He regretted Akedas Yitzchak because what did Akedas Yitzchak do? It caused, in some measure, Sarah's death. Now, interestingly, we say during the davening, the Haser Satan milefanenu ume'acharenu. We ask the Kadosh Baruch Hu that he should remove the Satan, meaning he should remove the Yetzer Hara from lefanenu, from before us, ume'acharenu, and from behind us. What does that mean? I understand he should remove the Satan from before us, right? What does it mean, me'acharenu, from behind us? A beautiful interpretation, which I heard many, many years ago from Rabbi David Mapsis. I'm sure many of you remember the Mapsis family. So he said, this is the first time I heard it, I've since seen it. He said that, the Satan operates in a very clever kind of way. And at first, the Satan attempts to deter us milefanenu. In other words, before we do something, what is the Satan? Before it comes time to do a mitzvah, what is the Satan doing? The Satan is saying, it's too cold outside, right? I can hear the Satan this coming Shabbos morning, right? It's too cold outside and it's nice and toasty in bed and it's nice in my house and, I can dive in by myself. I don't have to be distracted, So the Satan attempts milefanenu before we do something to try to get us not to do it. But if he fails, milefanenu, he's got a fallback plan. And what is the fallback plan? Me'acharenu. What does he do? He gets us to try to regret what we've done. Because by regretting what we've done, we compromise our accomplishing it. So if he's not able to convince you to stay in bed this Shabbos and you're able to defeat him and get to shul, so what might he do afterwards? Right, he might have you when you get home in the afternoon saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so cold." Right, I'm freezing, I'm shivering. I never should have gone this morning. All right, that's the Satan succeeding me'acharenu, right after the event has
start working on it.
Right after it's happened. Right after it's happened. V'haser Satan milefanenu ume'acharenu. Here, this would be an example of the Satan working me'acharenu after. In other words, Abraham went ahead and did Akedas Yitzchak. Right? He went ahead and bound Yitzchak on the Mizbeach and was prepared to offer him as a karban. All right? And the Satan tried before to stop Abraham. Right? We learned all the ways that the Satan tried before to stop Abraham. He didn't succeed. So he had a fallback plan. What was his fallback plan? His fallback plan was to cause Abraham to regret the Akedah. How would he do that? He would do that by shocking Sarah and causing her to die. That's how he would do that. So that's why Abraham only cried a little bit, because crying excessively would have been an indication, perhaps, that he regretted having done what he did. Interestingly, Rabbi Katzenellenbogen actually gives another explanation for why the small chaf, based on what we're learning this morning. He says that if Har HaMoriah is a 3-day journey from Hebron, because we know, right, that that's what it was. So Sarah dies, Abraham returns. How long does it take him to get back? Took him 3 days to get there. It takes him 3 days to get back. It's not like Israel, right? Israel takes 10 hours to get there and an eternity to get back, right? But it took him 3 days to get there, 3 days to get back. He now is back, right? Sarah has passed away 3 days ago, right? And he's back. What has he, quote, missed? He's missed those initial 3 days of Bechi. So that's why his Bechi is only a little bit. Maybe he got there on the 3rd day and he had a chance to cry for a little bit, but not the full measure of crying. And that's why the chaf is small. So that's perhaps a nice tie-in from what we're learning to the Parsha. So the 3rd day and the 7th day, okay? And there are, I am sure, other more Kabbalistic reasons for the 3rd day and the 7th day. In Yirtzeh Hashem, when I turn 40, I look forward to learning. And when you turn 40, I look
We'll
forward
be
to
there
sharing
right
them with
behind
you. Okay. So what happens if we miss the third day or the seventh day? What happens? So this is very interesting. Look carefully at the pasuk. The Meforshim struggle with the following, okay? This is pasuk 12, page 840. The Meforshim struggle with the following. I'm going to read it to you in two different ways. So follow along in the Hebrew. Hu yischata bo bayom hashlishi uvayom hashvi'i yithar. Okay, look at it again. Hu yischata bo bayom hashlishi, comma, uvayom hashvi'i yithar, period, or semicolon there. How would I translate that? He shall be cleansed, bo, with it. We know here we're talking about the afer, right? The ashes of the paraduma mixed with the mayim chayim. Bayom hashlishi, on the third day, comma. Uvayom hashvi'i yitar. And on the seventh day, he shall be tahor. What might I think if I read it that way?
That he doesn't need the second sprinkling on the seventh day.
That we don't see anything perhaps about a second sprinkling. If we read the pasuk that way, so perhaps we would interpret it to say that he gets the sprinkling on the third day, and without doing anything else, on the seventh day, yitar, he becomes tahor.
So you need a timeout on this thing.
Right? So the third day, and that's it. So that is one way of reading this. Is that the correct way of reading it? No. How do we know it's not the correct way of reading it, besides for the fact that I've been telling you there's two sprinkling? Look a little bit further down the page at verse 19. What does the Torah say there? Bihiza hatahor al hatameh, that the pure person, meaning the Kohen, sprinkles onto the tameh, the person who is ritually, we're just going to call him tameh, bayom hashlishi uvayom hashvi'i v'chit'o bayom hashvi'i. What does the Torah emphasize? That there is a purification by Yom HaShvi on the seventh day. So from here we learn that there needs to be a sprinkling both on the third day and on the seventh day.
Okay. The first one that you missed.
I'm sorry?
Where's the first stanza that it's always sprinkling and then he's...
If you look at verse 12, it could be read that way. If you look at verse 12, it could be read that way. It doesn't translate it that way in the English for obvious reasons, labriyut, right? Because that's not the correct way to translate it. But the Meforshim, who, labriyut again, who are dealing with psukim without punctuation, have to look at this possibility. And the possibility is that there's only one sprinkling, and that is the sprinkling on the third day. You don't need a sprinkling on the seventh day. Pasuk 19 tells us that's not true. Pasuk 19 tells us that in verse 12, when we look at verse 12, that the word yitar is describing the result of being sprinkled on the third day and on the seventh day. And that's what needs to be. There needs to be a sprinkling on the third day and on the seventh day. What happens if you miss the sprinkling on the third day? Can you do two sprinklings on the seventh day and call it a night? The answer is no. Okay, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch explains that if it's not the third and the seventh day, whichever day you do it becomes the third day. Meaning, if you forget on the third day and you do it on the fourth day, so that you still have 4 more days for the second sprinkling. So it now becomes the 4th and 8th, which are in reality the 3rd and 7th. In other words, there are 2 sprinklings that need to occur, one on the final day and one 4 days earlier. So those 2 sprinklings have to happen, says Rav Hirsch. Interestingly, it doesn't say anywhere that a person has to go to the mikveh, does it?
Well, it says here, and immerse himself in water.
Where are you reading on the
19?
At verse 19. Okay, so we're not up to verse 19 yet. I just made reference to it. Does it say anything in our verse about going to the mikvah? No, right? So you could say that our verse is simply describing the sprinklings. That's what you need, is describing the sprinklings. But in actuality, the Meforshim say that the word yitar, right, he shall become purified, always indicates an obligation of mikvah. There's no tahara that comes about without mikvah. Every tahara needs mikvah. It also needs sunset of whatever day. Could be the first day, could be the seventh day, like here, right? Every tahara needs mikvah in order for tahara to occur. Okay, so when it says here yitar, so we understand that to mean that it needs to be that there needs to be mikvah as well. So that was the process. Okay, third day sprinkling, seventh day sprinkling, and then seventh day mikvah and nightfall, and then the person became tahor. Why does it say v'hu yischate bo? Shouldn't it say v'hu yischate ba? He should be purified through it in the feminine. What are we talking about? We're talking about the para, right? The para aduma. Para aduma is nekeva. It is in the feminine, right? So we might think that it should be hu yischate ba. Unfortunately, come along to tell us no. It should be bo as it is, because it's referring to the afer. Afer is zachar, right? Afer is masculine. Afer ashes, right? It's referring to the afer, the ashes of the para aduma. Now, the para aduma, while it was a para, right? So that para aduma is nekeva, no question. But once it's converted into ashes, ashes are zachar, masculine, and therefore it's hu yischate bo. I saw something interesting. Remember, we learned when we first started Parshas Chukas, we learned that the paraduma had to be burned outside of the Beis Hamikdash, right, on Har HaZeisim, right, an area in Har HaZeisim. So there was actually a bridge that went from the Beis Hamikdash to Har HaZeisim. Why did they need a bridge to go from the Beis Hamikdash to Har HaZeisim? Because what is between, there's a valley between Har HaZeisim and Yerushalayim. So they needed a bridge to go over, and the bridge was constructed in a particular way so that Kohanim would not become tameh when they crossed that bridge. There was a space, an air pocket underneath, which is related to the conversation that we had about Kohanim traveling on airplanes and how things are, how perhaps bodies are stored in the cargo compartment. Okay. One final thought on this idea. The pasuk seems to be a little bit cumbersome, doesn't it? It says, "Hu yischata bo," right? He shall be purified. He shall be purified with the ashes. Bayom hashlishi, on the third day, ubayom hashvi, and on the seventh day, yitar. He will then become tahor after he goes to mikvah and the sun sets. And then v'im lo yischata bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi lo yitar. Right? What do we need that second part of the pasuk for? Like, can't we just assume what the second part of the pasuk says? The first part of the pasuk tells us that you have to be sprinkled on the third day and on the seventh day in order to become tahor. So can't we assume that if you're not sprinkled on the third day and you're not sprinkled on the seventh day, you don't become tahor? Why does the verse have to go ahead and specify? Go ahead and specify this.
Because they don't want to have any confusion, and they can get very clear.
Okay, Beverly suggests that
No,
the Torah was making it very clear, and we could certainly hear this. The Torah was making it very clear. You might think that, you know what, once I get past 7 days, so, I'm home free. In other words, all right, 7 days I'm tameh. Okay, I'll go through the 7 days I'm tameh, but once the 7 days are up, I'm home free. Along comes the pasuk to emphasize, no, that unless you have that sprinkling on the third day and that sprinkling on the seventh day, even if 7 day passes, and even if you go to the mikvah, nevertheless, you are not tahor from tumas meis. And that applies to us today. Every single one of us, even if we've gone to the mikvah, and even if we're past 7 days from our contact with a mace, or our being in the presence of a mace, nevertheless, we're not tahor from tumas meis. Every single one of us is tameh with tumas meis. Okay, so that's what you right. That's what you might right. That's what you might come to think. So along comes the pasuk. Right, along comes the pasuk. Doesn't belong to anybody, right? Right. Along comes. Right, along comes.
I leave mine in the car. Rabbi.
Okay.
Clearly, everyone is
All right.
saying ringtone.
Okay. Along comes the. Can I tell you something? I say Baruch Hashem. I say Baruch Hashem every day that we can't use cell phones on Shabbos. It is not only is it a welcome break for I think all of us,
If the pastor
right?
doesn't have to tell
a
the
healthy break for all of us. But can you imagine what shul would be like, right? With cell phones, it would be a nightmare. Okay. What?
Right.
Yeah, just said that.
The Pope just said that.
that.
There you go. I must be right.
Even if you're
If the
capturing
Pope-
yourself.
If the Pope just said it, I must be right. Okay. All right. So, okay. Right. So so we have this idea that if you don't do the sprinkling, if you're not subject to the sprinkling on day 3 and day 7, you are never tahor until you go through the sprinkling. So we will never be tahor from Tumas Mace until the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt and we have the opportunity to be sprinkled with the ashes of the Para Aduma.
The ash, it ties you to the ash water.
Correct. And interestingly, how much of the water has to be sprinkled on you? We didn't get up to this yet, but how much of the water needs to be sprinkled on you? Just a drop. Just a drop.
We did that.
Right?
We did that because we discussed how the different areas had to have just a small amount.
Right. So just a drop, as long as there was a drop sprinkled on you, so that was sufficient to be mitahir you. Interesting. A drop. It does not. It's not. What?
I didn't even do it.
Well, we'll talk about the precise. We'll talk about the precise measure. There was a precise way in which the sprinkling was done. We'll talk about that. And let's say you sprinkled and only a drop hit you, and the rest went to the side or something like that. Okay. So why this repetition? So Beverly suggests one reason, which I think is a very good reason. But there's another reason as well. B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven. What do they stand out for in your minds? The tribe of Gad and the tribe of Reuven.
They wanted to take their nachalot on the other side of the
Right.
Jordan.
So if you remember, right, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuven, Chatzi Shevet Menashe, or actually it started out with the tribe of Gad and Reuven, the tribes of Gad and Reuven. They came to Moshe Rabbeinu and they said, listen, we want to stay here. We're going to stay here on the eastern side of the Jordan River because we have lots of flocks and the land here is very good for the flocks. So we're gonna stay here and we're gonna, we would like to stay here and we'd like to build our cities here and everything else. And what did Moshe Rabbeinu say to them?
You have to fight with us to
Right.
conquer.
Moshe Rabbeinu said, you have to fight with us. You have to come over. You have to fight with us to conquer the land, and then you can go back and live on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now, this is called Tanai B'nai Gad u'B'nai Reuven, a condition, the condition established for the tribes of Gad and Reuven. The Gemara says, any Tanai, any condition that is not like the condition of B'nai Gad u'B'nai Reuven, ain't no Tanai. It's not a condition. What does that mean? It doesn't mean any condition which is not like the condition of Gad and Reuven is not a condition. So meaning it doesn't have halachic significance as a Tanai. So what was unique or what was special? What did we learn about the Tanai of B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven? That when Moshe Rabbeinu in Chumash mentioned this Tanai, he said, if you come over, cross the Jordan, and fight with us and help to conquer the land, then you will be able to go back to the eastern side of the Jordan and live. But if you do not come over and fight with us and conquer the land, then you will not be able to go back. That formulation, the positive and then the negative, is what distinguishes a Tanai of B'nai Gad u'B'nai Reuven. and call Tanai she'eno kitanai b'nei Gad b'nei Ruvain, any halachic condition that is not expressed as the condition of Gad and Ruvain was expressed, eno Tanai, does not have halachic standing as a Tanai. And that's why here we have this Tanai. What does it say? First, the positive. Hu yischata bo, bayom hashlishi ubayom hashvi'i yitar. And now the second part, now the negative. V'im lo yischata bo, bayom hashlishi ubayom hashvi'i. Right? And if he doesn't do it, lo yitar. Right? That's what makes it a Tanai of B'nai Gad u B'nai Reuben.
But why do you need a Tanai with these two parties of Hashem and Bnei Israel? The same way you need a Tanai between Moshe and those Shvatim.
What the Gemara is saying, Rabbi Meir is mentioning, is what the Gemara is saying is that this is the classical formulation of a Tanai. So whenever there is a Tanai, this is the classical formulation.
This is halacha.
The question you're asking is perhaps, why is it not learned from here as opposed to B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven? Right? What, why does this not become the source as opposed to B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven being the source? Okay, but that's a separate question. Interestingly, the Torah Tamima comments on this Gemara, wants to know, wait a second, is every case of Tahara couched this way? That if you do this, this will happen, and if you don't do this, this won't happen? No, obviously not. We don't see that by other expressions of Tahara. So the Torah Tamima points out that here is a bit unique because the Hu Yischata Bo is to be read as if he does this. Not when he does this, this will happen, but if he does this, then this will happen. The minute you have the if understood here, it becomes a Tanai, it becomes a condition. And once it has the conditional, this conditional aspect to it, we say that it is Kitanai, B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven, it needs to be expressed that way. So you have the positive and you have the negative as well. Okay, let's move on to the next pasuk. Pasuk Yud Gimel. The Torah tells us in pasuk Yud Gimel, the Torah says, Kol hanogea b'meis, whoever touches a mace, b'nefesh ha'adam. We'll talk about how to translate that in just a moment. The English translates it as the dead body of a human being, right, who will have died. Nefesh adam asher yamus, v'lo yischata, and he does not go through this purification process. Es mishkan Hashem timei. What happens? He is mitame, the mishkan, the tabernacle, the mishkan of Hashem, v'nichrasa hanefesh hahi mi Yisrael, and what happens? And his soul is subject to kares, ki mei nida lo zarak alav, because this mei nida has not been sprinkled on him. We need to translate that as well. Tamei yihiyeh od tumasobo. He will remain tamei. His tuma will remain on him. Interesting pasuk. So let's start to go through it a little bit slowly. Pasuk says as follows. We're going to begin. We'll begin with the Medrash. The Medrash says on this idea of Kol hanogea b'meis b'nefesh adam. Why does it have to say b'meis b'nefesh adam? So the Medrash says because we're only referring to the mace of a human being, right? If you touch the corpse of a human being, whether that corpse is from a Jew or a non-Jew, so you become tamei. You touch the corpse of a human being, you become tamei. An interesting halachic issue is how much of the corpse. It's not how much of the corpse do you need to touch, but how much of a corpse qualifies to make you tamei, right? Sounds like a bizarre kind of question, right? Sounds like a bizarre kind of question. But imagine 9/11 and imagine rummaging, going through the debris and finding a finger, right? What? Or let's say a bombing or something like that. chas v'shalom, a terrorist attack, and there's a piece of flesh, or there's a finger, or there's something like that. So is that enough to be mitame an individual? It's an interesting question. We have a minimum amount, that there needs to be a minimum amount of goof, a minimum amount of body, in order to be mitame a person. It's an unfortunate thing that we need to even talk about this, but it is a halacha. There is such a concept. But if there's no, it does not need to be flesh to flesh, because remember, even if you're carrying the mace, right, and you're not touching it, meaning that you're in some way transporting it, you also become tummy. So it does not require direct flesh to flesh contact.
But if there's no temple, why is this important? Because it's really just a psychological connection to the past.
But remember,
But it
this
really
was given at a time when there was a mishkan,
But I'm talking about the present.
and when there was going to be a Beis Hamikdash, right?
But in the present time.
No, in the present time, you're right. In the present time, it's not relevant to us in the present time, right? It's not relevant to us in the present time. But nevertheless,